Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be talking about a book series that we haven't spoken about in almost a year at this point. It's Shrapnel #1, specifically the Aristeia Rising miniseries. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in January of 2009 from Radical Comics. If you'd like to know more about the backstory behind Radical Comics and what their whole business model and goal of operation was, feel free to take a look at my video on the Shrapnel preview comic, which, by the way, doesn't have any real bearing on the story of this comic. The preview comic has no actual dialogue in it. It's just illustrations and I think like some concept art and that kind of thing, if I remember correctly. But overall, I specified at the beginning of this video the Aristeia Rising miniseries being what this miniseries is about. Radical doesn't have, or didn't have, any long-term ongoing series. Everything was all miniseries. So every single story arc for a different title was just its own miniseries. And I believe none of the titles got more than 2 miniseries apiece. Radical didn't publish books for a whole long period of time. The idea behind it was that they wanted to make movies from the stuff that they were publishing. Like I said, watch the Shrapnel preview comic video if you want a more in-depth explanation of how all that was supposed to go down. This comic, though, however, has 4 separate covers. Sadly, I only have 3 of them. There's the one we see before us here, which depicts a epic battle with big giant mech walkers and people wearing exosuits. There's also this one, which, if you did not watch my Shrapnel preview comic video, is literally just a reprint of the cover of that book, though it still looks really cool. It's kind of a, soldier with the exosuit, a mech walker behind him, and them being on a decimated battlefield in the background. Then there's this cover, which, as we can see, has a mech suit prominently featured on the front with what appears to be a Vulcan cannon for one arm and maybe some sort of an artillery cannon for shoulder-mounted attack. And actually, the second arm, it looks like it has a Vulcan cannon too. That's pretty cool. We also see a soldier riding on said mech suit's shoulder and a large following of soldiers behind in the background down here. This is actually the cover I think I like the most out of all of them. And there's also a 4th cover, which I sadly do not have. Creators: Mark Long and Nick Sagan. Writer: M. Zachary Sherman. Artist: Bagus Hutomo. Colorist: Leos Okita NG? I guess that's how you say that. Sorry if I'm wrong. Letterer: Sean Connaught. Editor: Jim Demonakos. Sure, possibly. Again, probably wrong. Sorry for that one too. Here we can see the cover that I do not have pictured. It was cover A. If I ever come across that, I'm sure I'll purchase it just to have it. We see here at the beginning of the story a large group of soldiers getting ready for a battle as they are prepping their weapons and getting loaded into their exosuits and mech suits. One of them stating how claustrophobic the inside of the exosuit feels, as it's incredibly tight and all you can hear is the deafening sound of your own breathing. I'd also like to apologize before we get too far into this video. This is a long book, over 50 pages, in fact, so this is probably going to be a long video, longer than I would like to make. Unfortunately, I'm kind of at the mercy of the people who created this book, and they wanted to make a long book, and it's a thick boy, and they used real heavy stock paper. I can't say a lot of bad things about Radical, but, some of these issues could have been a little bit shorter or made into more issues. This is a 5-issue miniseries. It could have easily been a 6 or 7, probably, but whatever. It's what they decided to do, and, they're entitled to their own creative choices. Here we once again see the beautiful 2-page full splash image of the epic battle that's going on that we saw in the preview comic. It's unfortunate they reused this image, but, I kind of understand. I don't know how long it was taking the artist doing all this artwork to produce all of this artwork, but it's relatively detailed and highly stylized. The lighting effects are pretty cool in most of it. Although I can levy one criticism, being that it suffers from the same thing that the Cybernary series suffers from, in the sense that sometimes it can be difficult to follow. Now, in the case of when the characters are just in a room or in a gathering of some sorts, it's kind of an annoyance there because you're trying to figure out exactly where the characters are and who you're following. But I think it's actually a really good thing when they get into the battle sequences like we see here, because it really helps to convey the chaos and violence of the battlefield. And it really kind of helps you really like get a sense of what the characters are going through in, this life or death struggle. That part of it I really like. It's just kind of when they're doing their everyday life stuff that it seems like it's a little bit, weird or difficult to follow in some ways. And this page illustrates what I was talking about, as we can see the squadron of the soldiers pouring off of what appears to be a transport of some kind. One of the soldiers who's already in the battle looks back, barks some orders. They start to open fire. Their CO tells them to get in their phalanx formation, as we see his first-person view with his heads-up display. This is a really cool shot of all the different bogeys popping up on his HUD, along with some losses that have been taken. However, before they can get in formation, they're immediately targeted by two enemy soldiers with shoulder-mounted rockets. He yells incoming, but it's too late for some of the soldiers, as there's an explosion and they are all instantly neutralized in the blast radius. The CEO then yells out that they need a corpseman, which apparently is this large spider mech that we see grabbing the top half of a deceased soldier. They then begin to realize that the enemy is changing their formation. So they abandon the formation that they were originally going for and split into small groups, moving along, watching each other's backs. They then throw grenades into a line of enemy soldiers, where we see an explosion take out several of them. The CO then looks back and tells some of his men to pull out their swords, which are like a high vibration blade, similar to what is used in the Star Wars mythos. Then, however, they are cut off by a large mech suit, and they realize that they're in for a world of hurt if they can't take care of this thing quickly. The mech walker, of course, wastes absolutely no time in laying waste to the first line of soldiers in the group. The CO yells at them to fall back so that the soldiers that have the shoulder-mounted rockets can move forward and take out the mech walker, which they do rather quickly, blowing off one of its legs, bringing it down, taking it out of the fight. Unfortunately for them, that walker was leading a whole other battalion of foot soldiers behind it, who are now rushing forward and opening fire as they quickly cut down several of the men in the squadron we've been following. The squadron is very quickly being overrun as they try to fall back and return fire during their retreat. However, the CO is startled when he turns around and realizes that just behind him are more enemy soldiers and they've been surrounded. And before he has time to react, said enemy soldier opens fire and kills him. Or that would have been the case were it not for the fact that these Marines were all currently engaged in a training simulation, as we see one of the soldiers get out of his exosuit, and then all of the soldiers lined up talking to their commanding officer, who is berating them for failing pretty miserably during this training exercise. As the colonel continues to berate his men, he explains to them that the reason that they were so quickly defeated was because they abandoned their initial phalanx formation, and that if they try to do this in a real battle, the outcomes will be the same again. That they need to trust one another and believe that each soldier to their left and right will do his job the same as each one of them is doing their job, and that the men who are all in this simulation, being commanding officers, have to maintain the discipline of all of the men under their command. The men all agree, and, as they're beginning to wrap things up, they're suddenly interrupted by an alert over the loudspeaker that states they are quickly approaching the planet of Venus and that they all have to get to their battle stations. So we see everyone start to scramble. One of the men looks back at the colonel saying he's not sure if he's ready to do this given the way the simulation went. But the colonel says that there's no time for self-doubt, that he needs to trust in his training and to just keep his head straight and follow the plan, and everything's going to be okay. As we then see an exterior shot of the spaceship they are on slowly approaching the planet of Venus, and we also begin to overhear a conversation amongst two people on the surface of said planet Venus. We then see a slow zoom in to the surface of the planet of Venus as we see there is a space colony on the planet's surface in large domes, very similar in appearance to probably the likes of the living quarters that were depicted in the movie Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger. If you've never seen that movie, I mean, it's all right. There's definitely worse movies out there, but it's nothing I'd call, astounding or mind-blowing cinema. It's just an action movie and it's fun and whatnot, but you're not missing anything if you haven't seen it. We then see the interior of the dome and realize that the domes are pretty large, as you can see how tall some of the skyscrapers are inside of it. We then move to the interior of a nightclub where the two men who have been conversing are entering for a little bit of fun and recreation before their mining shift starts. However, one of them is very upset about the fact that a girl that he likes is currently fraternizing with what they call splicers, who are genetically engineered and modified human beings. And this is one of the components of the story that exists within Shrapnel, that there are genetically modified humans and non-genetically modified humans, and it really kind of comes down to class status, being that the wealthier can afford the genetic modifications to their offspring, whereas the poor and or lower middle class cannot. So it's kind of creating like a two-class society. However, Venus is going out of its way to try and prevent genetic discrimination and create an environment where humans have where unmodified humans have all the same rights as those who are modified. We see here that one of the men is yelling at a genetically modified human being that he calls a slicer, who's sitting with the girl that he likes, and then that man tells him to shut up, Hellet. Hellet being the term that is used for non-genetically modified humans. This man's name is Stap. His friend's name is Jammer. Jammer, upon hearing this, realizes that he's not going to be able to hold Stap back, so he lets him go. Stap walks over to the splicer that was yelling at him, telling him that there's no reason for him to be here. This is a Hellet bar, and that he should go to one of the other pods where his kind congregate. However, he makes the remark that Hellet girls are just easier to get in bed, so they come down here because it's less effort on their part. This, of course, doesn't go over well with Stap, as he yells at the man for implying that, their women are loose or whatnot, or that they're less intelligent. And the two of them continue to argue as Jammer goes over to the bar and sits next to his friend Sam as she continues to sip on a cocktail and asks why Jammer doesn't stop this from happening. Jammer, of course, informs her that he is not Stap's father and that Stap's got to make his own decisions in life. On the other side of the room, the argument is heating up even more as the splicer in question starts to insult Stap's family and say that his parents were, poor gutter trash that couldn't afford to get him the genetic modifications to make him a better person. However, the girl in question that they were arguing about starts to intervene, saying that the splicer shouldn't have said that or brought up his parents. However, before she can finish that sentence, Stap leaps forward and headbutts the splicer square between the eyes. Jammer, upon seeing this, becomes frustrated, knowing that he now has to get involved in this fight to help out his friend, who's outnumbered, and asks if Sam would like to join. However, Sam says that she's happy to just sit in the bar and watch, and that she has no intention of getting involved in a fight in a nightclub just because of one of her friends arguing about a girl that he liked but wasn't actually dating, and that she's also busy watching the news. As we see the news report above her talking about the events that have been happening with the solar war that's been going on, and how several of Jupiter's moons have been captured. Mars has been captured by the Alliance, and it also talks about how many Helots have been killed, as the Alliance tends to see them unfavorably. This, of course, angers Sam as she looks back over her shoulder and sees that the fight is continuing as Stap continues to beat up the Splicer, telling him that he needs to shout Helots rock. Unfortunately for them, we can see a large contingency of police officers showing up outside of the club. And when they break through the door, Sam realizes that they need to get out, or she's going to be bailing the two of these guys out of jail once again. So she yells at them to follow her out the back door as they run through the kitchen and escape the nightclub on their way to her vehicle. We then see that the three splicers who were fighting with them have been placed under arrest, as Stap and Jammer and Sam make it to Sam's car and then drive off to safety, as we see the three of them talking inside of the vehicle. Sam, of course, giving the other two an earful about how they're irresponsible and she's tired of having to try and bail them out of trouble. She refers to Stap as the brother she never wanted. However, when they get back to their apartments and are starting to get ready for work, Jammer takes Sam aside and tells her that Stap really does care about her, and so does he, alluding to the fact that Jammer and Sam may have had some sort of fling or one-night stand. Sam, tells Jammer that there's really no future between the two of them, that what they had was fun, but, there wasn't any way it was going to work between them. Jammer kind of states that he wished things could have been different, that they could have known each other before the solar war. Sam tells him that this wouldn't have made a difference because she was a different person, but Jammer says that he was a different person as well. At the time, apparently, he had his own land, his own home, until the Solar Alliance rolled in and took over the planet or moon he was living on. And then eventually their rampage wound up causing the death of his sister. And now he's stuck on Venus, just trying to start all over again and pick up the pieces. Sam tells him that, it's going to be okay because at least he's still free, and, that counts for something. And he agrees with her as the two of them get suited up and make their way to their spaceship so that they can then launch off the surface of Venus to one of the asteroids around the planet and begin mining during their shift. As their ship approaches the asteroid that their shift is on, they launch two anchors from the ship, which reels it down towards the surface of said asteroid. And as they depart, they all deploy their own anchors into the surface and clip them to their suits so that they can remain properly secured to the surface of the asteroid, as there's no real gravity. They begin to converse amongst themselves as Stap begins to do a bit of welding on some equipment. However, he forgets once again to depressurize the hose that he's working on, as it blasts off of its coupling, knocks into his chest, and breaks him loose of his tether, throwing him off the surface of the asteroid into the void of space, as both Jammer and Sam look back in horror to see their friend tumbling to what should be his death. However, in the blink of an eye, Sam, wasting no time, untethers herself, jumps off the surface of the asteroid, catches up to Stap, grabs him, tells him to stop breathing so heavy before he passes out, turns around, launches an anchor back towards the surface that grabs on, And she reels the two of them back down to the surface and tells Jammer to go back into the ship and get the med bay ready because they're going back in. Back inside of the ship, we see that Stapp is unconscious, but Sam states that he just hyperventilated. He's going to be okay. Jammer is very surprised at how quickly Sam was able to assess the situation and save their friend, as if she had been trained to do so. She states that it was nothing and that it wasn't a big deal, but Jammer feels like she's trying to potentially hide something and asks if she thinks it would have been better if she had let Stapp die. She says that it wouldn't have been, and that she's a little upset that he would ask her such a question. But as the two of them return to the surface of Venus, talking, they decide to just kind of let it go and, move on with the evening. Back on the surface, Sam is sitting in her apartment with the lights off, conversing with a young girl, talking to her about the events that took place on the asteroid. As Sam is still somewhat distraught, the young girl asks the same question as Jammer if she feels like she should have let Stapp die. She, of course, says no, that she just had a lot of things come flooding back to her when the event took place, and now she's worried that she's drawn unnecessary attention to herself and is going to raise questions that she didn't want to have to answer. The girl then states that she's running. Sam says that she knows, that's why they're there on Venus. However, the girl then states that she's actually running from herself. This, of course, angers Sam, and she says that's incredibly stupid and that it doesn't make any sense. However, the girl points out that Sam has never been able to really live her life since they got to Venus, and that she's holding on to a lot of things emotionally, and until she learns to let those things go, she's never going to be able to move on, and nothing about her life is going to truly get better. And points out that the reason Sam is so angry is because the things that she's saying are touching on a nerve. Sam starts to bring back a retort. However, she and the little girl are interrupted when Stapp bursts into the room. We then see Sam reach over quickly and grab her little, projector device, as the girl herself was a hologram. Stapp asks, what that was about or who he heard her talking to. She said it was nothing. She was just thinking out loud. And Stapp informs her that there is a Alliance ship approaching the capital of Venus, and asks her if she wants to go and check it out. Sam then states that she wants to know what's going on, so the two of them leave their apartment and head out to the streets. On the next page, we see the Alliance ship landing near the capital of Venus, as we see a colonel disembark from the transport, walking up a large row of steps that are headed towards a building that looks pretty similar to the White House. We then see the colonel go inside of what looks pretty similar to the Oval Office, but isn't. As the president of Venus tells him to have a seat, the colonel declines and states that this won't take very long, as he tells them that the reason he is here is to accept the complete and unconditional surrender of Venus to the Solar Alliance. The men on either side of the president, however, take real issue with this as they yell out at the colonel. However, the president then settles them both down and tells the colonel that Venus has always remained neutral in any conflicts and wants nothing but peace. They have no desire to have any kind of fight with the Solar Alliance or their enemies, and asks the colonel, what exactly this is all about. The colonel responds by telling him that this is just the Solar Alliance's way of making sure that all of their, initiatives and way of life are spread and distributed evenly across the entirety of the solar system. However, one of the president's men interjects and states that this is crazy, that they can't just come in and demand the surrender of Venus and act as though they're all just going to take this. The colonel, however, states that, this is something that he doesn't want to see go to a military option. They don't want this to be any kind of a firefight. They want it to be a genial transaction, as he calls it. The president, however, states that this is ludicrous, that, he's stating it like this is just some simple thing where, Venus is going to join this, foreign power and relinquish its independence, and that, nothing is going to be done to try and, prevent this, what in all intents and purposes is a hostile takeover, and asks that the colonel please understand the position that he is in. The colonel, however, states, though, that he really wishes that he didn't have to be the one to deliver this message, and that he wished that things could be different, but they aren't, and that he's just here to inform the president of the offers made by the alliance, and that if the president chooses not to accept them, that the ramifications will be less civilized the next time the alliance lands on the surface of Venus. The president, realizing that the colonel is inferring all-out war, jumps to his feet and says, how could you possibly do this? How can you be okay with the expansionist policies of a, totalitarian government? And the colonel simply responds that the strong do what they can and the weak do what they must. One of the president's men asks what they're going to do, and the president asks him back, what can they do? The large crowd that is gathered outside are all wondering amongst themselves what the Solar Alliance ship was doing here and what the visit had to do with the people of Venus. We see Stapp and Jammer talking amongst themselves as Jammer realizes that Sam has gone. We then see a few hours later a aerial shot of not the Pentagon, but the Octagon, which is assumedly the same thing, but on Venus and a slightly different shape. Inside of the Octagon, the president explains to the rest of the heads of state that they were given a 24-hour deadline to formally surrender to the alliance, as the rest of the heads of state ask what they can possibly do to stand up to the alliance. One of the military commanders stating that, they have about 1,000 or so of the exosuits, but only about half of the number of soldiers needed to fill said exosuits, though he believes that they can get the volunteers necessary to fill out the rest of them. However, he's interrupted by other members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff who basically tell him that they have no hope of surviving a complete invasion by the Alliance if, they've only got roughly 1,000 soldiers fighting and, half of them are untrained. But, he's then reminded by one of the other members that if they don't, the Solar Alliance is going to completely take over. They're going to completely abolish most of the Venetian laws, or Venusian laws, perhaps. It's one of those two. And that their entire sovereignty will be taken away from them. They decide that while their choices aren't good, their best option is to try and fight. And the commander states that he's going to try and get all of the troops ready as fast as he can and report back to the president. The president then, off by himself with one of his aides, who comes up and states that he believes that the Helots will volunteer of their own volition, but doesn't believe that the splicers will be quite as enthusiastic about trying to fight the Alliance, and wonders if they should institute a draft. However, the president states that the principles of Venus have always been about freedom and individual liberty, and that he believes to institute a draft would completely betray all of the things that Venus was founded on. So he decides to just put out a call to arms, and he believes that the splicers will know that it's in their best interest to try and fight the Alliance as well, and hopes that they'll also come to the aid of Venus the same way that the Helots will. Outside in the domes, we then see alarms go off as the president makes an announcement telling the people of Venus about the situation at hand, and that he told the Alliance that Venus would not surrender, and calls upon all of the citizenry of Venus to join up in arms and volunteer for the fight. As Sam realizes things are about to hit the fan, she pushes her way through the crowd and rushes back towards her apartment, as we see her go by a volunteer office, which has a long line of people getting ready to sign up and join the fight. And we then see her pass a young man trying to apparently goat his girlfriend into sleeping with him because it's going to be their last night, or it's going to be his last night before he gets deployed. She ignores all of this, running back towards her apartment. We also see the interior of a hangar where technicians are getting a bunch of the exosuits ready. And as Sam is packing up things in her apartment, she's interrupted by a knock at the door. The knock on the door is, of course, coming from Jammer and Stapp, who are asking Sam if she's ready to go. She states that she's packing, and they said no, that they're going to go volunteer and join up in the fight. She tells them that they're morons, that this is a stupid plan, that the two of them are going to get themselves killed, and that the Marines will show no mercy and completely wipe out all of the resistance forces on Venus. And if they do manage to survive, it'll be as slaves. Stapp is a little upset about this and says he never took Sam as a coward. Jammer tries to prevent her from running out the door. She tells him to move out of the way, and that nothing they do will make a difference, that they're just going to die, as she pushes past him and he yells her name. We see her run out towards her vehicle as Jammer tries to catch up and grabs her by the arm, telling her that the only way things are going to change is if people like them stand up against it, and that, she can make her own choices, but, he really wishes that she would stay and fight. She then responds saying that, you remember when you said earlier that you wish things were different? Well, so do I, as she grabs him and kisses him and then hops into her vehicle and drives away. We then are teleported to the interior of the Alliance spaceship, as we see many of the Marines are suited up in their exosuits and are loading themselves onto dropships as they prepare for the battle ahead, and are kind of surprised that the Venusian people didn't just surrender, and are a little irritated that they even have to deal with this battle. We're then back on the surface of Venus, apparently in some sort of an elevator, as we see Sam talking to the hologram again, whose name is Rhea. We find out that Rhea is actually modeled after Sam's sister, who was killed, and Sam blames herself for her sister's death, even though the hologram assures her that no matter what action she took on the day of Rhea's death, there's nothing that she could have actually done to change the outcome or prevented it. She then goes on to question Sam as to why she's running, as the only way that she's ever going to be able to forgive herself for the things that have happened to her in her past is to stay and fight and face her problems finally. Sam seems like she's not really too keen on that advice, and still says that she should have done something to save Rhea, even though, once again, it's, not possible that she could have done anything. But Sam states that she should have been stronger than she was. As the elevator reaches the floor that they were headed to, the hologram tells Sam that if she runs now, she'll be running for the rest of her life, as Sam turns the hologram off and makes her way towards the hangar where her spaceship is parked. However, on the bridge going to that hangar, she looks out and can see the Marines and Alliance spaceships orbiting the surface of the planet, and the dropships being ejected from the bottom of these towards the planet, carrying the Marines to the Venusian forces who are lined up in formation, getting ready for the battle. Their commanding officer telling them that they have to fight together, and that many of them are not going to survive this battle, but their sacrifices will not be in vain, and that they have to push forward and win this fight because the entire populace of Venus is counting on them, and it's basically going to result in them being slaves if they don't make their stand here and now. We then see Stapp and Jammer as Jammer can't figure out how to load his magazine into his rifle. Stapp grabs it and shows him exactly how to do it, and then kind of mocks Jammer, saying, didn't you pay attention during the briefing? However, Jammer retorts saying that it was 8 weeks of boot camp crammed into 1 hour, so how was he supposed to get the gist of all of the things they were supposed to do? When he's interrupted as he points forward and shouts, "Look." We then see that Jammer's attention was caught by a bunch of the drop pods hurtling towards the surface of Venus. Their commanding officer yells to open fire as they blow up a few before they manage to land. However, many get through and the Marines start to pile out of them, launching up with their, I don't know if it's really a jetpack or like a jump pack, hurtling themselves through the air into the battle. We then see more drop ships detaching from the large ships that are orbiting the surface of Venus. As they get close to the surface, they land and are fired upon. Unfortunately, they were carrying mech walkers, which are not going to be taken down by the small arms that most of the Venusians are carrying, and it opens fire with its own projectiles and rockets, and the battle is starting to look grim immediately for the Venusians fighting for their very survival. Meanwhile, Stapp and Jammer are trying to get their wits about them during the fight. Jammer yells out for Stapp to move left. However, before either one of them can react, they are pummeled by incoming missiles that land very close to them. We see there's a large explosion. However, the two of them manage to survive with no major injuries as Jammer helps Stapp to his feet. The two of them are then distracted as they see one of their mech walkers get blown up very close to them. The two of them say that, they've got to get out of here. We see Jammer yelling, "Go, go, go," as this battle is quickly getting out of hand. We then see one of their fellow soldiers being caught by one of the Marines as he stabs him through with one of their sonic swords. We see then, I believe this is supposed to be Stapp and Jammer trying to get away. The CO then yells out, "No, stand your ground." However, back at the hangar, we see that Sam has suited up and is about to launch her spaceship. Unfortunately, she can also hear all the radio chatter coming from the battle as she realizes that it's quickly turning into a massacre. We see her try to drown out the sound and not focus on it as she starts up her ship and hits the thrusters. We then get another two-page battle spread as we see this large mech walker moving forward, opening fire on the Venusian forces as they're trying to find cover and retreat. It's very evident that the battle is going very poorly for them at this moment. As the men continue their retreat and desperately try to find cover, many of them are cut down by the pursuing mech suit. I guess Jammer yells out, "What now, Commander?" The commander just screams for Venus as he continues to fire. However, his shots are bouncing off of said mech suit as we see in the reflection on his visor, which is a cool shot. And then he lowers his gun and just says, "We're screwed," as we see that is the end of the story, and it is to be continued in the next month's issue in Shrapnel number 2 that we see an advertisement for on the next page. This is a cool image right here. I like this whole propaganda style, join the war effort image that they've got going on. That's a nice touch. Presumably that's one of the covers, and I think this is the other, as it states there's only going to be 2 covers for issue number 2. I don't think I have both of them. I probably only have one, but I'll have to check when I eventually make a video about that book. On the next page, we get a bit of a rundown of the things that the crew from Radical had going on at the 2009 New York Comic-Con, trying to get their books into the hands of readers and kind of make a footprint for themselves in the comic book landscape at that time. On the next page, we get a full-page advertisement for another Radical title, City of Dust, that involves vampires. I think at least one of the City of Dust miniseries. I'm not sure if I have them both or if there were two even, but I know I've got some issues of City of Dust, so if I have at least the first miniseries, I'll definitely make videos about that. On the last page of the book, we see an advertisement for Hotwire, Requiem for the Dead. I might have one or two issues of Hotwire. I don't think I have any, though. And on the reverse inside cover, we see advertisement for the hardback versions of Hercules, the Thracian Wars, and Caliber. Caliber is super cool. That takes place post-Civil War, involves like some kind of supernatural gun. I've only read like one issue of it, but I remember liking it. And Hercules, the Thracian Wars, if you've ever seen the movie Hercules that starred Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, this is the comic that movie is based on. And I think I do have all of the Thracian Wars. There's also another miniseries that I can't remember the name of that one, but I'm pretty positive I have at least the first Hercules, the Thracian Wars miniseries, and I'll probably do videos on that at some point as well. And that was Shrapnel, Aristeia Rising, #1. And I really like this book a lot. I'm a huge fan of Shrapnel. I'm also a real sucker for exosuits and mech suits and interstellar war stories. So, like, or interplanetary war stories, I guess is what this one would be. But, so I'm probably a little bit jaded, but I loved the way that the artwork in Shrapnel works, despite the fact that it's difficult to follow at times. I think the story's really engaging. I really enjoy this book as a whole, this story as a whole, and several of the other Radical titles. It's a real goal of mine to eventually get every single book that Radical ever published, which shouldn't be that hard. I think altogether it might be like less than 100 total issues across their entire company of actual published comic books. You know, despite the fact that they weren't terribly successful in what they were trying to accomplish, at least in not in the terms of what their goals were that they had set, I still appreciate Radical for what they were trying to do and how they were trying to think a little bit outside of the box and make comics about more than just superheroes and, you know, try and tell engaging stories with really high quality artwork, really high quality books. Like I said, this book is made out of some seriously heavy stock paper and has a very premium feel to it. And, you know, almost to the point where this book has like the same kind of weight that a magazine has. It's kind of crazy. But, you know, ultimately it just didn't work out for them the way they had hoped. You know, they were trying to achieve the same kind of goals that, you know, Disney and Warner Brothers were trying to achieve, but with a budget that was, you know, not even a fraction of the size of what those two mega companies are working with. So, you know, I can appreciate the idea, and I would still love to see it. I mean, Radical Pictures, as far as I can tell, still exist, or Radical Studios. I would love to see a property like Shrapnel go to a streaming service and turn into, you know, some sort of a mini series, or, you know, maybe a multi-part movie franchise. I think it would be great for it, along with some of the other stories. It's just, you know, can they secure the funding? Can they get people on board with directing and acting in it? I don't know. Do they still have that kind of pull and that kind of clout in the industry? Maybe, maybe not, but it's something I would enjoy if it did happen. But then again, those are just my opinions. Your opinions may be different. You might have hated everything Radical ever came out with. And if so, it's okay. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.